Education Chair here at Intuit. And Frank Tumino works with the majority of all these artists. And he's going to be telling a little backstory, which I found fascinating. I was able to hear him a few weeks ago discuss various artist biographies and everything. And Annette Wayne, who is also on our executive board here at Intuit, who curated the exhibition. So I'm going to leave it up to them. Feel free to look in the back room. We've just hung the Teacher Fellowship Program exhibition with students. I think they actually are from 2nd or 3rd grade up to seniors in high school. And that's in the back. We work with 10 schools, 20 teachers, 5 Saturdays of training in the fall, and then the teachers write a curriculum, teach the curriculum in the spring, and then we have the exhibit every June. So I'll leave it to Matt in front. Thank you.
Thanks everybody for coming. Most of you are friends or family, and so we can keep this really informal today, and feel free to shoot off any questions, have a dialogue conversation. And I'm Matt Arient, I'm the Vice President at Intuit. I also curated the show with Frank Tumino, standing next to me.
Frank Tumino, I'm the Center of the Arts Administrator at the Little City Foundation. The Center for the Arts consists of 5, I think it's still 5 studios we're consolidating right now, but all the studios try to cover every aspect of the arts that anybody might have an inclination to pursue. And if they want to do something, they try to make it possible for them to do something. And we're an organization that looks at it from a fine art perspective rather than some organizations that look at it as to be therapeutic or educational. While we say that those things do happen, and we're really happy that it happens, we're looking at it from a fine art point of view, and that's what we are pursuing. And I think that's what we get for a lot of our artists.
So I think from Intuit's perspective, that made the show extremely exciting, especially having Little City so close, less than 30 miles away, having a place where there are other studios like this. For those who don't know, there are other studios like this around the country and around the world. But like Frank was saying, have different all of them have different focuses. They have what they were trying to serve their artists. But what's really exciting about what's going on in Little City is that the artwork is so compelling. And for those of you who haven't been into it before, we do 2 to 3 shows in this main gallery every year of outsider and self-taught artists from all around the country and all around the world. So having something locally that has just the highest level of artistic quality, in our opinion, was extremely exciting. So when we started the show, Frank and I, there's obviously many talented artists at Little City, but Frank and I chose 11 artists that we thought best personified. Again, what Frank was getting at, kind of the breadth of the work. There's all kinds of studios at Little City. Obviously, we weren't able to show all of them, but what we did want to show were some of the different formats and mediums that each individual artist is working on. You see computer-generated work over in the corner. There's drawings. There's works on paper, collages. So that's really where our title came from, Beyond Influence. All these individuals are influenced by a lot of things, but in the same respects, they all live in their own little world when it comes to making art. They all have their own ideas. They may share ideas from time to time. You'll see pieces that share even images or pieces of collage, but each of these individuals has their own unique style and are displaying that, I think, very, very interestingly and very uniquely through the pieces that we picked.
As long as we're on the subject of influence, I really think that these artists are true to the title of the show. They really are beyond influence in the normal sense of the word. Where they are being influenced is through popular culture. You will be able to see popular cultural references in a lot of these works, especially the media work, because it's so easy to draw images off of the internet. There are a lot of them are very savvy about the internet and things that they can find online. Even some of the other work, you can find pop cultural references. Mike Lyman's Pizza Night back there, he did a whole series of depictions of menus in various different restaurants. And Matt had referenced something a second ago about sharing an image. There's the image of Damien Hirst's Jules Gull that shows up in actually 2 pieces of this exhibition, which is odd. I thought it was odd since the title of the exhibition is Beyond Influence, and part of that is I still claim is that they do not influence each other, and they don't. There's that image that shows up in more than one picture here, but it was a random kind of an event. We had printed up some images of that skull actually for work that isn't even here today, and it was used for that. There were some leftover Xeroxes lying around the studio, and different artists picked them up and started working with them independently. It's not because they saw something somebody else was doing and decided, I gotta do that now. It's just they like to scavenge, frankly. They scavenge for things to put in their works, and that was lying in the studio one day. So it's a very random thing. They're not picking up influences from the art world, they're not picking up influences from each other, but pop cultural references is something that could seep into their work at all times.
And an idea that Frank and I started with that we kind of got away from in the end, but I think still holds true, is what we wanted to show is that the work here by untrained artists is of the highest quality and can be shown in any gallery of trained or untrained artists in Chicago, New York, London, anywhere. We feel like this work is amongst some of the most interesting contemporary art being made and shouldn't be necessarily classified as untrained, self-taught, whatever term you want to use. So we started with that idea, and I think we stuck with it, but when it came down to it, we really wanted to showcase as many artists as we could. So we selected those 11 artists, but then as we brought it back together, I think we kind of accomplished our goal. We got a group of work that if you took any individual of these pieces individually and placed them in a gallery in Superior Street and said that this was a new artist who had just graduated from an art school on the East Coast, I don't know that any of these works would surprise you. They kind of have a cutting-edge art world feel to many of them. So that was our initial goal with the show, and I like to think we succeeded at that.
I hope so.
Want to talk about who the artists?
Yeah, you want to just walk around the room and talk about some of the artists that you talked about. The first artist on the wall here is Charles Beinbaum. Unfortunately, I never got a chance to meet Charles. He passed away just prior to my joining the city, but he left behind a huge body of work, which I think is really high quality. And Charles was a master craftsman. His most common thing to draw would be whatever he saw going around him. There's countless portraits he's done of the other artists that are in the studio, of the studio itself, shelves, everything's on the shelves. So some of the depictions he made were highly realistic. He was able to work in more than one style. There's this style here, he has one of the other artists, Michael Lyon, and it's a very abstracted, almost cartoony kind of a style, but he's done other things. And, well, I guess this portrait of John is getting there, but there's even other things that he did that were much more naturalistic, much more realistic than that. And as I've heard the story about when Charles joined the studio, it was almost an instantaneous thing. The one piece that didn't make it in the show, we brought a lot of stuff here, and only one thing didn't make it out of the wall we didn't find room for. It was a self-portrait that Charles had done. And it was part of a series of, I think, 7 or 8 self-portraits, and those were the very first things he had ever done. And you remember those self-portraits, they were really sophisticated, each one done in a different style, some of them very subtle, using a variety of media. The one that we had, I think, was a monoprint. He had painted onto a plate, pressed it down, and we left this really ethereal image. And it was a really great piece that didn't really fit in with everything else that was here, so we left it out.
I think the important thing Frank said is that a lot of these artists do a lot of work. They're there daily working because this is what they love to do. They're true artists in every sense of the word, and that this isn't at least for the 11 artists that we have here, this isn't a passing interest for them. They're driven and motivated to go and create work daily, right?
And that's going to be the case with any good outsider artist, that they are creating out of some kind of inner passion, and it's true with these people as well. There's a lot of people that come to our studios, probably 75 or 80 different artists during the course of the week utilize one of our studios or another. But the people that are in this room and the people that are regularly making their way into museums and galleries when we do these kind of exhibitions are hardcore people. They are there because they want to be there. Everybody is in the studio because they want to be there, but these are the people that have the inner drive to create art. There are some people that come there because they just enjoy being there. They don't like the social atmosphere. They like the activity, but they don't necessarily have that art drive. These guys do. So.
Over here we have an artist that I was first introduced to. I curated a show in the back gallery last year that was on text and outsider art. And I think Frank somehow heard about that and said, hey, we've got an artist that I think you would like to see a work of. Which when I saw, I was just blown away by the quality of it. And we used a piece not in this show, but a different piece in that show. His name is Tariq Eccles. And what I find so fascinating about the use of text in outsider art is it can take many different forms. It can be very spiritual, it can be very kind of just out there, you don't know where it's coming from, it can be very repetitive, it can be very just blunt. So there's all kinds of different aspects about using text. Well, Tariq has that repetitive nature to him where he'll take one word and constantly write it over and over and over again, which is something you see in not only his work, but works of other outsiders. But when you see how he blends it together and actually uses the words to create images, I think it adds to the excitement and the qualities of the piece. Frankie, I've never got a chance to meet Tariq, but I know that you've said that he's very interesting in the way he communicates.
He is. Tariq almost never speaks, which is a little bit strange when we consider that his paintings are filled with nothing but words. He's able to speak. He chooses not to in most cases. When he does choose to speak, it's always in a sing-song pattern. He'll sing an answer to a question if he thinks it's important enough to answer. If not, he'll just ignore you. And he's always humming. He's always got a song that he's must be running through his head constantly. We think it's of his own composition. I've asked his mother about it, and she can't identify any source for it other than his own composition. So we think that whatever he's singing all the time is songs that he's writing on the spot. And everything about him is very musical, very graceful, very flowing. The way he moves, which is very slow and deliberate, and looks like it's part of a dance. And the way he creates art is like that as well. I've got some great photographs of him working where we had just laid fresh paper down on the table. So it's really easy to see that new marks that are made, and he had the piece on top of the paper, and he was putting in his rows of repetitive words and whatever it was he was writing that day, and it just went right off the page onto the table, and there was only around 10% of it was on the page. The rest of it was all over the tabletop, and he puts it on sometimes, and certainly that time, in these big arcs that follows the course of his hand as it moves. And it's like that is also part of the dance for him, that putting things onto paper. So it's all one big experience with Tariq. Normally he's working with words and actual words and phrases that are recognizable. Sometimes, like here, you just have these repeated shapes. And I think what this is right here is actually the letter O and portions of the letter O. Every mark that he makes has something to do with letters and words. And I don't know for sure, but I believe that the reason he does these O's a lot is because his favorite word to write is open. The word open is in almost everything that he does. Sometimes it's the only word that is present. And I thought I just saw that here somewhere too, but It might be buried in there. Sometimes it's very hard to see. I'm sure it's there. I'm sure it's here and there as well. Open is something that he writes all the time. So whenever I see the O's, I'm thinking that stands for open. Very rarely will he do anything that is actually pictorial. But here he has these marks that look like the number 4, and those are actually sails. And he let us know that, which is why we have the title of being sailing. He will also sometimes draw farm animals, especially horses. And recently, a few of his works were acquired by the Man Museum in Belgium. And in order to satisfy their record keeping, I interviewed Tariq's mother to answer a lot of questions that the museum had. And it turns out that when Tariq was around 5 years old, his grandfather owned a farm, and the family used to like to go to the farm, and they would all go horseback riding. And the grandfather bought Tariq his own pony so that he could accompany everybody on these excursions. And it's never left him. He's always loved this, and to this day he still draws horses, even though that's like the only thing he will draw. Mike's stuff is kind of scattered around the room. There's the flag is by Mike Lyon, the pizza menu, and the little piece that is being called the self-portrait over by the door. Words were very important to him as well. He wasn't quite like Tariq, where it would be the sole focus of his drawings, but he had a really interesting script. And I don't think he's viewed it like Tariq did as being the purpose of what he was doing. When he was writing, he was looking at it as writing, making a sign, leaving somebody a note. But it was such a great way of writing that they turned into some of my favorite pieces. He used to write me lists of things to order, and I've still got a stack of them that I've saved for myself that are lists that Mike wrote me of supplies that needed to be ordered. He would start out writing something in a fairly straightforward, recognizable script, but he wouldn't be able to stop. And after he would write out the word, he would start filling things in, and he would fill in loops in letters, which you would stop, but then he'd start blocking things off and filling those in. And it got to the point where you would have large areas like this that are just a big square that is filled in with black, but that's like probably 10 layers of ink on top of that, with various phases of him filling things in. And if you let him go, I imagine that at some point it would all get obliterated. Sometimes the trick at the studios at Little City is to get somebody to stop. Tell them, okay, this looks good. How about we stop right here? And if you catch it in the right spot, then you've got a masterpiece. But sometimes if you let it go, then the masterpiece gets obliterated. And sometimes with Mike, especially, there was this one piece I remember in particular where that happened like 4 or 5 times, where it looked great, and then the next day it was all obliterated, and I'd be despairing, and then it would work up into another really nice state, and so you never know, it could come back again.
The thing I really liked about this piece, and this is really the first piece that I saw at Little City that I really loved, is that when we talked about using all kinds of different mediums and styles, I love that Mike had the foresight to take this flag and change it and change what it said. Obviously, I think you said California Republic underneath there, but yet leave the bear head there. It's kind of like the bear is telling you this, and it's you want to listen to a big brown bear. So I felt like the use of a flag, which is probably something that was just donated or found around the studio, and yet not totally obliterating what it was. So it's recognizable and still has meaning within the saying. I mean, just shows such a sophistication that you hardly see in any art. I mean, it's just, to me, an amazing piece.
It's a really personal piece from Mike as well. Those are his catchphrases. He had many more, but those were the 3 main phrases that we hear from him all the time. And he spent a lot of time working on that as well. It doesn't look like it's all that labor intensive, but it really was. It took him a long time to finish that. He worked on it on and off for a long period of time, probably close to a year.
Here.
Errol Jeffries. Errol is one of the 3 artists that we're making a documentary about, which the trailer and some clips are playing on the monitor. I don't know if everybody's had a chance to see that, but it's called Share My Kingdom, which is a phrase that Harold came up with. Harold is our go-to guy for titles. He comes up with wonderful titles. I just documented a piece yesterday. What was the title on that? I think it was called The Flying Seabird Sits on the Water Excited. And the person who had written that down told me about when she wrote it down, and the way that Harold delivered it was even better, because it was like he was deliberating as he was saying it, and the word excited was added after a couple of heartbeats. Like the rest of it just wasn't saying what he needed to say, and that was the punctuation, excited. But Harold is a really interesting case. Like a lot of the artists at Little City, he has a real drive to what he's making and why he's making it. He has a very tragic life story. Came from a history of child abuse, never had a home to live in that was secure until he came to live in Little City. And consequently, he became really interested in housing and providing homes for himself and for the people that he loves and cares about. When we were doing the documentary, we found his sister, who had not seen Harold for around 30 or 40 years, and we were able to interview her, and a spectacular story came out of that. I had assumed that a lot of the markings that Harold puts into his work that look like blueprints, there's something in every piece that he does. Sometimes it's entirely covered with these blueprint-like lines. Sometimes it's just a little tiny portion, but there's always something that looks like a blueprint in every one of his pieces. And he will tell you that he's drawing blueprints for heaven. Heaven to him is a place where housing will be provided, and it's a very concrete place in his mind, I believe. I had assumed that he got the idea for these blueprints and the general plan, just the scheme, from looking at actual blueprints, because over the years people have brought lots of blueprints into the studio, knowing that he liked to do things about housing, and he would draw on top of these. And I thought that's where this came from. Turns out when Harold was around 4 years old, his younger brother, who was around 2, got loose in Chicago somewhere, and he wandered away, was lost. A man found him wandering the streets, brought him back to a police station, and took an interest in the family. And I guess he was wondering what kind of family would have this 2-year-old that nobody was looking for or knew was even missing. And it turns out that it was this family that was, really in need of some help. And this man started coming every weekend to spend time with them. And Harold became his favorite, because Harold was really interested in what this guy did. He was an architect. He worked in the neighborhood, and they used to go back to his office, and they would draw together every weekend. And that's how he got this blueprint schemata in his mind, and has been drawing like that ever since. To make it even more poignant, as far as I'm able to tell from talking to his sister and everybody else that knows anything about Harold's childhood, this man must have been the only person the only adult in Harold's life that was not abusing him one way or another. So, there's that extra added layer of meaning for Harold, that when he's drawing like this, he's remembering the one person who was good to him. And he's also a fantastic artist. I love Harold's stuff. Another great title, The Fencing Squirrel. And usually it'll be just like it is here, where there's the architectural imagery and the faces that are kind of like embedded in the architecture. And my thought is that the faces are voices, because Harold hears voices. And I've always looked at it as being kind of the way that Harold perceives the world, where there's the architecture, and there's voices coming out of the architecture, and there it is. And you'll get a different answer from Harold every time you ask him what he's depicting, what are those faces. Sometimes he will say that they are voices, sometimes he'll say spirits or angels, or sometimes they'll just say they're my family. So it depends on the movies and when you ask them.
I'd say this is probably most similar to maybe the type of outsider art we would show it into it. It's in its idea, I guess I should say, in that Wayne is singularly focused on one thing, and that's drawing concept cars. And he has binders and binders and binders, many of which have probably been lost over the course of time, that detail these concept cars in every conceivable function or option that could go into them. And unlike some of these others where you see similarities between all the pieces, but each one's uniquely different, I think Wayne fits the mold most in that he has this drive to just do one thing and do it over and over and over again. As Frank has told me, each of these cars he can go into detail about what safety functions are in them, and some of which you can see on the drawings. But literally, you could flip to any page and point at a car, and he could tell you all the details about it. So I think it would be great if we wish we had been able to show one of these books, which I've seen that they're just these giant notebooks filled with page after page after page of these. But I think you really get a perspective of the idea of that just from these 6.
Yeah, Wayne is one of the people that needs us the least amount. He's been doing this every day of his life since 1959, literally drawing cars every day since 1959. And if none of the people at the Center for the Arts ever came into his life, he would still be doing it exactly the way he's doing it right now. He has a fantastic memory. He's another person that we're doing the documentary about. We took him back to his old neighborhood to film some sequences there. And we're walking around the neighborhood, and he'd be pointing to spots where restaurants used to be, telling us what he ordered there in 1963. It's just amazing what he's able to remember. And so it shouldn't really come as a surprise when he does exactly what Matt was just saying. He's able to tell you what the concept features were that he meant to have on any one of these cars, even though he probably he could have drawn it 10 years ago or whatever. My theory with Wayne is that he does not think of himself as an artist at all. He thinks of himself as an engineer, and these are like memory devices. Wayne's real art is not in drawing the car. Wayne's real art is in telling people about the concept behind each car, and that is how he fulfills himself. These are like memory aids. You flip open a book, point to something, and then he's on. The performance begins, and he will not stop until you force him to stop, as Kate could attest to. Now, Wayne is Lori Kuby is the next person on the wall here. Very detailed, very naturalistic. She's very concerned with the natural world. She loves insects. She especially loves spiders, or she loves to talk about spiders. She talks about spiders every day. She will bring Tupperware with her to the studio, capture bugs in the morning, draw them, release them back into the wild at the end of the day. She's also somebody who's been doing this for a very long time. At the age of 4, she was on the Phil Donahue show. He had her on as a child savant, and she was doing drawings that looked approximately like this, even at the age of 4. So I think she's another person like Wayne that would be doing exactly what she's doing, whether she ever met any of us or not. Which kind of brings up the question of what our role is with some of these artists. And generally, for the most talented artists, we play the least amount of a role in their art. There are facilitators that are always in the studio, professional artists, and I mentioned before that sometimes the job of the facilitator is simply to stop somebody when it comes to a good time to stop. Sometimes they make suggestions, and sometimes the artist will take it, and sometimes they won't. Generally, they're working the most with the people who are not in shows like this, because they are the people that are most in need of help. The people that are creating at this kind of level really have their own vision and their own drive, and they don't need as much help as everybody else. So, but there are some cases where, because of technical aspects, and they need some kind of help, and that's especially apparent with the media work. I've got work here from John King and Luke Tauber, Luke being the third person that's in the documentary. And there's some really good work that is being done on the computers, but it's a more facilitator heavy kind of an activity, simply because of the fact that it's being done on a computer. It's much more technical, much more heavy with things that need to be remembered and learned. And even though that sometimes they don't retain that kind of learning as well as somebody in another walk of life would. So there's smaller groups that are in the computer lab and more of a role for the facilitators. But Luke is somebody who is obsessed with classical music, classical composers, and the manner of their death and the aspect of their tombs and coffins, and there's a real morbid aspect to what his interest. His background is also very interesting. His parents were both survivors of the Holocaust. They were both the sole members of their families that survived the concentration camps, and they met actually in a deportation camp, waiting to come to the United States, where they remained for 2 years before they were able to come to the United States. Luke was born in a deportation camp. He was actually stillborn. There was no hospital on the site of the camp, which is probably resulting in Luke's disability. They had to rush him to a nearby hospital. They were able to revive him, but his brain had been without oxygen for however long it had been, which resulted in some damage. But I think his interests are really driven by his family background. His parents were both actively trying to get him interested in music. I think they saw it as like a lifelong interest that could stay with him even after they were gone, as they both are now. And the very morbid aspects of Luke's interest in this, I think, is also a direct result of the horrific things that happened to his family. And he heard these stories, and it was just something that must have left a really big impression on him, as you could imagine it might. So he's not only interested in these classical composers, but it's all tied in with his memory of his parents, whom he loved very much. And when he's thinking about a classical composer, he's thinking about how they tried to get him interested in that, and he's also thinking about the other things that he remembers about his parents, which are these horrific stories. And it all comes out in the art.
I think we gave you a broad overview of most of the artists here, but does anybody have any questions for Frank or myself? Well, go ahead.
What do you say? You must have a way of encouraging them. What do you say to them? What this is all just freedom to.
Well, a lot of the people that are in the studio have been there for a long time, and especially the people that are represented in a show like this. So they've got the routine down now. They know that they're coming to the studio, they know they're going to work, they usually have their own ideas. Sometimes, like with Luke, he will not start something unless he talks to people about it. And it's not because he needs to talk to people about it, it's because he really enjoys that aspect of the social environment. He likes to talk to people, he likes to have people pay attention to him and to what he's doing. So his favorite thing is to come up to me and say, so what now, Frank? And it's like, we're not in the middle of a conversation, I don't know, what now, Luke? So he just likes to do that, but he doesn't really need that. There are some people that are not as comfortable in the studio, that maybe they don't know what to do. And those are some of the people that I was saying that the facilitators play a larger role with, and they might give them some ideas, make some suggestions as to what medium they can use, or if they like to use color pencils or markers or acrylic paint, or to go on until they find something that sounds good to them. And they'll just kind of coax something out of out of them, but it's not usually not a problem.
I know it's probably different for each artist, but how do they feel in general about their art being shown?
It is different for each artist. It's really different for each artist. Some people don't show the slightest interest whatsoever, like Tariq, who's creating some of the best art in the studio. Sometimes I'll come back from the framer and I'll show them the framed piece because it's a dramatic difference. When something gets framed, it just looks better. And they may not have even been thinking of it like that before. But you show it to Tariq and he doesn't even say anything. He just goes on with whatever he's doing. Other people you do that with, and they're fascinated. Joe Flash loves to look at his own work, especially after I've framed it. He'll come and he'll go through his work. If there's something in the back room that is stacked up against the wall, ready to go somewhere, he'll come back there and he'll just stare at it. Same thing with receptions. They all like to come to receptions, but it's a social event. It's something, and they're worried about what kind of food is going to be served. Luke, especially, one of his other abiding interests is in cheese. He loves cheese, so his question is always, is there going to be cheese there? And I say yes, then what kind of cheese? Will they have this? Will they have that? And he'll go on about the cheese, so he's excited about that. Some of them do get a lot of pleasure out of actually talking to people about their art. Wayne is, as I mentioned, obsessed with that. That's his actual art, is talking to people about what he's done. Other people will still enjoy coming here and talking to people about their art because they enjoy the attention, and they're usually getting praise at that point, and people are not going to tell them they don't like the art, so that's a good experience for them. They like to do that. And then there's people that they don't care about that either. It doesn't seem to make any difference to them at all to see their work hanging in a great place like this, or to have anybody else looking at it or praising it. It's a real mixed bag.
I think you're answering my question, but I was going to ask, have the artists been here and what is that experience like for them?
They have, and this reception in particular was great. There was a lot of people that were able to attend. I was kind of afraid that there wouldn't be because it was right scheduled for rush hour and we're pretty far away and they've got a tight schedule of what they have to do every day. And I just thought it would be really hard for them to get there. But a lot of them came. I think everybody that was in the show that was still with it was here. And they enjoyed this reception particularly. But I will also try to schedule a lot of receptions that are local. So I'm not always doing shows in wonderful museums like Intuit. I'm also doing shows in like libraries and cafes and anything I could get in order to create opportunities for people to come to the receptions. I actually think that is a big part of the program. Whether they are showing a lot of interest or not, I think it's very important for them to have that experience. We would like to create as near an experience as they would have as an artist in any other walk of life, because as well as our intention at the Little City Foundation, it sometimes creates a really sheltered environment for them. They are not mingling in the general populace like they would be otherwise. And I think the Center for the Arts provides one of the only outlets for them where it really approaches what their experience would be if they weren't living in Little City.
Anybody else? Thank you all for coming. I know Frank and I will be here for a while. I encourage you to take a look around if you have any questions. We have a new show with our teacher fellowship program opening in the back gallery. Encourage you all to come back to Intuit, become a member if you're not already. Also, I'm sure Frank would be interested in talking to you about any of the works. They're all actually, Little City obviously sells their work, and also maybe interested in seeing the studio, because I've seen it many times and it's fantastic, so please feel free to discuss with them.
Visitors are always come to the studio. If anybody's interested in ever seeing it, give me a call. I'll be happy to arrange it.
Thanks for coming out today.
I probably want to say something about the Share My Kingdom.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I've mentioned the documentary several times. I guess I should have mentioned that the premiere is set for the 9th of October. It's going to be at the Gene Siskel Film Center, and that'll be the first showing, but there will be many showings. And keep your eyes open for it. I'm pretty sure something will happen here as well.
Thank you.